And a very good evening to you. I am Lisa Lord, and my special guest is the president of the Barbados Manufacturers Association, Mr. John Marshall. Mr. Marshall, thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
You're most welcome. No, I want to start by looking at the Barbados Manufacturers Association. Tell me about your objectives, a little bit about your history, your members, etc.
Well, the Barbados Manufacturers Association has been around for nearly over 50 years now, and through that period of time has helped many manufacturers grow and get their objectives either locally or regionally. It's an association of those manufacturers. We are welcoming new members all the time, and we really love to see some of the new activity that our members are engaged in. And over the years, we've sort of partitioned our membership into different groups. So we have the construction group, so we in charge of building materials and ourselves at Harris Paints and our competition and so on. We have the furniture groups, we have the chemical groups, we have food and beverage, which is a very active side of our membership as well. And we have the other packaging, people involved in plastic packaging and labeling and so on. A very diverse range of companies that make up the membership of the association.
Let's break down the manufacturing sector in terms of its performance and the types of products that we are making in Barbados.
Well, the Barbadian manufacturers are very innovative. They come up with a variety of items. It's not just like they're trying to copy things that they see in international markets. They are always trying to come up with their own things. We make everything from soaps to detergents to packaging, chemicals. Obviously, most people are very familiar with our insecticide brands.
Yes.
Breads, biscuits, you name it. These are things that are household names to every Barbadian, and the diaspora as well too are really interested in these products, and they've done well across the markets. If there's one thing that the Barbadian manufacturer is known for, is its quality, and we have sacrificed a lot to make sure that we maintain that quality regardless of where we send our products.
And how is the sector performing?
The sector as a whole, if you kind of look at it from a perspective of the last 40 or 50 years, it has declined considerably. And that decline has slowed somewhat, I would say, in the last few years, but it's still a decline nonetheless. And we have performed quite well. It's a very resilient sector. So for instance, even during the pandemic and other things like that, we were able to maintain our sales to some degree and maintain our employment. Even during the pandemic, I believe the central bank came out and said it was one of the leading sectors during that period of time. So it's shown its resilience and its importance to the economy.
No, I want to get back to the decline and COVID a little later. However, we know that rum continues to be our biggest export still. As far back as 2015, rum contributed just over $76 million to the island's foreign exchange earnings. But how easy is it to get into the export market?
Well, into export markets in general is quite difficult. Rum has done very well, and particularly going into the North American and European markets and even beyond. And we are very happy with our members, and as they should be, for the investment that they've put into it. For smaller manufacturers, it's quite difficult. So for instance, if you're a small manufacturer and you've managed to gain a foothold in some market share here in Barbados, it's then hard to sort of step away from that, leave your local customers aside and then go somewhere else looking for more customers. And that in itself is difficult. You have to do it if you want to grow. The challenge that a lot of our smaller manufacturers find is in just getting the product from Barbados into other markets. So the larger manufacturers, the more established ones, typically will be able to fill a container, which is fairly ready and available and cost-effective services. But the smaller manufacturers have a hard time trying to find consistent, cost-effective services for a pallet, 2 pallets at a time. And that is really where we see some of our challenges coming right now for the smaller manufacturers to get into the other markets with their smaller cargo sizes.
But Barbados often boasts about various trade agreements. So in terms of us benefiting from these agreements and getting our products into different markets.
Yes, well, the trade agreements are there to try and open that door, right? And I guess the the idea behind a trade agreement is build it and they will, they will come. The challenge, however, is that if that is not then followed up with other infrastructural changes to try and help us get the products from point A to point B, it's going to be a challenge. So for instance, we might create a trade agreement with Colombia. Mm-hmm. Well, unless it's a full container, there's no one taking smaller shipments from here to Colombia, right? Similarly with Europe, we could get smaller shipments from here to the UK perhaps, but not necessarily that easily into mainland Europe, right? So there's structural challenges that need to follow those trade agreements. The trade agreements as well too is something that we have benefited a lot of in the past. The challenge is that we have to be very careful and consult with the industry as to where we want to go next with our agreements. So for instance, if we're going into a market that's considerably larger than ours, it actually could put us in a disadvantage to some degree, because the agreements tend to be bilateral, meaning that the product can flow both ways. Yeah. And while we operate and negotiate openly, as Barbados and even as a region, those markets, they can operate and negotiate on their tariffs, but what they cannot negotiate is what we call non-tariff barriers. So barriers that are put in place by their labeling structure or their other standards and so on that they will put in place that make it harder for us to get into those markets. So while we might be able to get a product from here to there and it not incur a duty or incur a small duty in doing so, when it gets there, it then has to conform to some other standard, which can be burdensome in some cases.
That was going to be my next question, because you mentioned the difficulty in terms of the size of the export, that being a limitation, but then the labeling and the standards of our products.
Yes.
Is that prohibitive?
It is prohibitive, yes. And our products do meet our standard, and the BNSI here does a good job of checking our standards. And we also have a lot of the individual companies go outside to make sure that they have accreditation in certain markets for our products. The challenge, however, is that whether or not that accreditation is accepted by the receiving market, and making sure that we're meeting their label standards and so on. So there's a lot of extra work that has to go involved. And when you look at how difficult it is, because you can appreciate those markets are trying to protect themselves, yes, as well.
Of course.
How difficult it is for some of our smaller manufacturers. They might just say it's just too much. If I focus that much on that export market, I'm going to lose the base here that is my better butter, so to speak.
So do you think that our small manufacturers are getting enough support to get their product into foreign markets?
Not in the way that they need, not physically. They do need more support physically to get the product from point A to point B. And those larger manufacturers in those other markets can more easily get their products here than we can get it from here to there. So that's one of the challenges that we have. And we need to understand there's the fiscal and legislative pathways that they need to open, but we need to open some physical pathways as well.
In terms of the groups that you represent, you mentioned furnishings, and I know when I was growing up, we used to hear a lot about locally made furniture, but we're not hearing that much about furniture anymore.
Furniture is one of the sectors that has declined the most. We have a very high standard for and history of furniture made from mahogany, yes, and things like that. And they really took a hit from assembled furniture from other markets and things like this. So it was very difficult for them to compete cost-wise. Very high quality, very good craftsmanship. And there's a lot of craftsmen that still do it. But it was really a cost issue for them. At the end of the day, they could not produce that quality, with the inputs costs that they had, and essentially get a divan or a dining table into someone's home at the same price as something that was assembled, in a much larger market.
In terms of the sector's contribution to foreign exchange, we know about rum, but you also mentioned food. We are well known for our biscuits, yes, being exported as well. Do you think the sector gets enough respect or recognition for its contribution to foreign exchange earnings?
I think the challenge there really is that when people talk about foreign exchange in Barbados, obviously they're talking about tourism, and that is a massive benefit. There's absolutely no doubt about it. So in comparison to that, it might not seem as though it's getting as much respect, but actually when you look at the amount of exports per capita, Barbados actually does do a significant amount of exports per capita than some of the other markets across the world. The challenge is that you can't just measure exports by the foreign exchange it's earning one on the export. It's also saving foreign exchange from not having to import that product in the beginning.
Correct.
So that's you get a benefit in both ways.
And I'm glad that you mentioned tourism. Now, we are a tourism-dependent country, as you mentioned. However, is that sector supporting the manufacturing sector as it should in terms of the high-quality products being displayed in the ports of entries, the villas, the hotels, etc.?
The Barbados Manufacturers Association and the BHTA have a MOU, and we do have meetings from time to time to have discussions about any specific issues. And I would say from our experiences that we do get good support from the BHTA. We do appreciate that in some instances, particularly with the global brands, they're global brands, they have global design firms, and they have to follow that design methodology, which usually means that they then have to buy their furnishings or fixtures or whatever it is from that place. Yeah. So that is a bit of a challenge for us to try and overcome that, or to try and meet the standard in that way. But by and large, whether the hotels are under new construction or maintaining themselves or designing themselves, that they do give us good support, and they would reach out to local manufacturers to try and get their products done locally. The big advantage from a hotel perspective is that if you have a local supplier for it, if you have a problem, your ability to fix that problem because you have somebody local to try and deal with it is significant. And for a hotel, when you have guests leaving this morning and coming in the afternoon, you want very quick service, and really the local manufacturer is the one that can do that better than anyone else.
But that support could be much improved.
It can be improved. It can always be improved, right? It's not 100%. We don't make every sale that we want to them, but we appreciate that we still have to compete, right? So we understand in the times when they have made a decision that was not a local manufactured item, that for whatever reason we were not able to compete at that time. And we just want to make sure that we maintain that dialogue and that discussion to give us the opportunity to do it first.
Let's go back and look at COVID-19. Now, it was a difficult time for the average Barbadian, but for businesses, it was a nightmare. Mm-hmm. Let's look back at COVID-19 and the impact on the manufacturing sector.
The sector actually was supported reasonably well by the government. They allowed us to open or do some limited openings, within the first couple of weeks of the first lockdown, and then there was, reasonably open again for the second lockdown and things like that. So they were able to help us continue some of our businesses, and for the most part, I would say that the lockdowns themselves didn't really hurt manufacturing any more than they did any other sector. Yeah. Obviously, they impacted our staff. We had to be very careful to make sure that our staff were safe. But we were able to make it through. And for what we found is that as the tourists weren't necessarily here on island for that period of time as much as we would like them to be, we did lose some sales because there's just not as many mouths to feed on the island as there normally would be, as you could expect. And in some cases, for our export customers, a lot of the distribution companies that we're selling to in export markets had to focus their efforts on things like PPE and stuff like that. So they didn't then bought less of the things that we were selling them. But for the most part, we were able to maintain our employment, and there were very few businesses that sort of went out of business during that period of time. And as it stands right now, most of them have indicated that they've recovered and are on a normal path.
And we saw the garment industry specifically switching to making masks. So there was some creativity there as well.
Yes, so there was creativity, and like everyone else, we were trying to think of what we could do to try and help the markets along. And there was PPE and other things that we were trying to manufacture. A lot of us that deal in chemicals, even some of the raw materials that we use in chemicals are the same raw materials they're using in hand sanitizers and so on. So we switched our production.
We saw that with rum, the rum industry.
Yeah, they donated a lot of the alcohol and so on to try and help those markets. So, without that, we probably would not have been able to get access to some of those hand sanitizers that on the international market had essentially, evaporated. But luckily, the manufacturers had the inventory that they could supply for hand sanitizers.
Now, COVID was a medical disaster. We are coming to the end, hopefully, of the Atlantic hurricane season in terms of the manufacturing sector being resilient to deal with any catastrophe.
Yes. I would actually say that manufacturing is better poised than some other industries to deal with this, mainly because within manufacturing, there's certain policies that you work with. And one of those policies is, it might seem obvious, but you never put all your eggs in one basket. So for instance, even if we're buying a raw material, whether it's locally or internationally, and we're perfectly happy with that vendor, we're perfectly happy with the item that they're making, we would still even sometimes make sure that we're still buying another raw material from someone else. And we make sure and maintain those relationships so that they understand why we have to maintain a dual relationship, or sometimes even triple, so that if they have a challenge, we can fall back. We are not no scrambling somewhere else to find a raw material, right? And we've seen many of our members have to do that. Sometimes you maintain these relationships with other vendors, even if the price is higher, just to make sure that you can maintain that supply.
I'll come back to supplies, but sticking with COVID, during the height of the pandemic, we saw a lot of health and safety concerns at a number of manufacturing plants. The fact that there was improper ventilation, you had access to the facility via one door. What is being done there to correct those issues?
Yes. Well, most of the manufacturers, with regards to health and safety, with regards of the not even so much with the pandemic, but certainly from
going forward,
normal fire safety, you need to make sure that you have easy and quick access out to the muster points, right? And there's a lot of things that we learned from it, and we can discuss as well to the Trade and Innovation Summit, which we'll discuss later.
We'll
but
discuss.
There's definitely elements of health and safety embedded in that as well too, to make sure that we share best practice and are able to get the entire industry up to a better level of operation.
But were you surprised?
I was, how to put it, in some cases, we were able to see that the manufacturers were able to maintain being open and were able to properly sort of keep the staff socially distanced and so on. It's just that it's difficult within manufacturing. If you've designed a team to have to work closely to get something done, you can't then kind of spread them out as easily, physically.